Apple and Google are now ready to compete with some of the very best phones on the market with the iPhone 13 Pro and the Pixel 6 Pro. Both are very, very compelling flagships. The 13 Pro is more of a refinement over the former model, with better screens, battery life, and cameras, whereas the Pixel 6 Pro is a complete redesign from the former Pixel 5. Both of these phones are excellent and great options for you if you're willing to switch between Android and iOS, but which is the very best? Let's talk about it. This is NOISO, and this is the iPhone 13 Pro versus the Pixel 6 Pro. Let's start with the design of the Pixel 6 Pro. Google finally created their storied flagship design that we've been all waiting for, ready to compete with the highest end flagships on the market. And honestly, it's a tiny bit of a letdown. Now I'll get in deeper with my full review of the Pixel 6 Pro coming in a couple weeks, but generally I like this design and it is a great improvement over the Pixel 5, but it's not really groundbreaking. More often than not, if I take both of these phones out of my pocket and put them face down on a bar and ask people which is the better designed phone, people will point out the iPhone more often. And it's just because iPhones define phone fashion more than Android phones do. And the Pixel, despite its really unique look, does look very techy. For me, I really care a lot about the ergonomics of a phone, and comparing the two, it's not clear which one's better. The glossy curved edges of the Pixel 6 Pro, while more comfortable to hold in the hand, is a little bit more difficult for me to grip onto, and so I found this falling out of my hand more often. The Pixel 6 Pro is a lot larger, but frankly I don't love one-handing either of these phones, so it doesn't really make a big difference in most days. But now let's flip these phones over and we'll talk about the displays. Both of these phones have high refresh rate, high resolution OLED displays that get super bright. Both, to my eye, are absolutely great. I love both of these displays, but they're quite different in a couple ways. Notably, the iPhone opts for a notch, whereas the Pixel 6 Pro has a hole punch. And the Pixel 6 Pro also has a significantly larger display, so there's more screen real estate if you're watching videos or browsing with the web. The curved edges of the Pixel 6 Pro aren't my favorite feature, and frankly, when you're in more fluorescent lighting, there's a tendency of light to just bounce off the edges and be a little bit distracting. But there's not as much shadows or tinting as many reviewers have kind of alluded to as compared to older Samsung phones, which always had problems with that. Regardless, I frequently find myself switching from an iPhone 13 Pro to an iPad mini or a larger iPad when I get home, whenever I want to watch real content, whereas I can often find myself just sticking with the Pixel 6 Pro rather than switching to a larger screen when I want to watch YouTube. A big reason why I don't like watching content on the iPhone 13 Pro is the notch, which, while it is smaller than former models, I still don't like it, especially because it doesn't really bring as much value as it used to. As long as we're all still wearing masks in public or in buildings, which it might vary based on where you live, unfortunately, the experience of unlocking the iPhone 13 Pro is still a horrible experience. The Pixel 6 Pro, on the other hand, opts for an under-display fingerprint sensor, which is more standard in the industry, even though it is a couple generations behind in terms of quality. Yes, the accuracy is quite good. I didn't find myself being locked out from too many wrong entries, but unfortunately the speed is just behind those from Samsung or OnePlus or other manufacturers. But despite that imperfection, I would still take the fingerprint sensor on the Pixel 6 Pro over Face ID on the iPhone any day. Let's talk about the specs and the performance. Both of these come with the base level of 128 gigs of storage. It doesn't matter how much RAM they come with because it's not comparable. But in terms of performance, both of these are very, very quick phones. That helps that both of them are variable refresh rate with up to 120 Hz. But frankly, the animations on the Pixel 6 Pro, and this is a software tweak, feel a lot faster. For some reason, moving around the Pixel 6 Pro feels a lot quicker and speedier, and it feels like applications close and open faster, even if they're not really doing so. The iPhone 13 Pro doesn't feel slow by any means, but it does feel like Apple opted for fluidity over speed, and Google chose the opposite. The Tensor chip in the Pixel 6 Pro does feel like a good first generation move away from Qualcomm, even if it's not quite perfect. Because I have noticed a fair amount of stuttering in Twitter when I'm swiping through tweets and a couple other places, but I'm hoping that that is more of a software issue than a hardware issue, and that it will be solved through software updates. If you were to choose based off of benchmarks or historical performance, then the iPhone is the better choice, considering Apple has proven that they are able to make phones that last very well into the future. And while Google is improving their software updates so that this is going to last longer, we don't have the evidence to prove that a Tensor chip will last 3, 4, or 5 years into the future. And then let's briefly talk about the battery life. The iPhone 13 Pro has greatly improved in terms of battery life over its predecessors, in that it's now consistently a day and a half and sometimes even a 2-day phone for me. Frankly, there's been many weekends where I've been able to take the iPhone along with me, and as long as I don't use it excessively, it's able to last the entire weekend. On the other hand, the Pixel 6 Pro has a little bit more typical battery life for Android flagships, in that I typically get somewhere between 6 and 7 hours of screen on time, which is excellent, but not really as groundbreaking as, for example, the S21 Ultra, which seemed to have a couple more hours consistently. When MKBHD mentioned that he only gets 4 hours of screen on time with the Pixel 6 Pro, I frankly don't see that, but maybe he's using his phone very differently than I am. Then there's the rest of the software. I'm not going to do a deep dive on Android versus iOS because frankly that's very subjective, but instead I'll take a few quick steps to talk about what I like and dislike about the newest versions of each of these operating systems. Let's start with the iPhone. First of all, I want to just say that notifications on iOS, even in 2021, are pretty bad. It is very, very difficult for me to manage notifications and get the notifications that I want and prioritize those. I sometimes want to receive some notifications from my app and not receive others, and unfortunately, that optionality on the iPhone is just not there. One positive with notifications on the iPhone, though, are they are consistently better with syncing between the iPhone and my other Apple devices. If I swipe away a notification on my iPad, it will also go away on my iPhone, more so than the same situation on an Android phone and an Android tablet. We are all very happy when widgets finally came to iOS, of course years behind Android, but frankly, they look better than the Android experience and look more consistent. But unfortunately, even a year or several years after the release, there's still not a lot of widgets available across applications, and many of them are more visual and news and information oriented rather than actual action oriented. For example, as far as I know, there's no way to control Spotify songs through a widget and skip between tracks. That option has been available on Android for a long time. It seems that widgets on iPhone are really more focused on getting you to stay on the home screen to just see news and see updates, whereas widgets on Android are a lot more focused on getting you to control and not have to go into applications to make actions. The Pixel's new Material You UI in Android 12 has all of the promise of a beautiful, unique, customized, and unique to you skin with custom colors and designs and features, but it's far from delivering on that promise. In my experience, Material You is gaudy and loud. There's a lot of large elements that I don't really want on my screen, and frankly, there's a lot of inconsistency in font sizes and object sizes and object shapes. For example, like the new version of Gboard, when you type on a key, it's got a square shape, but then the preview of that character that you're typing on is a circle. And frankly, I am not a big fan of the new Quick Actions menu. This is ugly and it's difficult to read, and frankly, I just want the same old little circles from beforehand. I also don't want several swipes in order to get to the brightness slider. The Pixel software team honestly went off the deep end when they were designing a software that was unique. And while many people are calling it modern, frankly, I see more similarities from Android skins from a couple years ago. Maybe that's going to change as they continue to refine it, but it's not the prettiest design. And I prefer instead more sophisticated, refined, consistent designs. And frankly, the iPhone wins there. It's ironic that if the Pixel was still on Android 11, I wouldn't feel this way. Finally, let's talk about where these two titans clash the most in camera. Both of these are incredibly capable camera systems. The iPhone 13 Pro is more traditional in that it has a standard wide-angle telephoto and standard lens. And these are some of the best cameras that I've used on an iPhone or really any phone. Now, it's interesting that in MKBHD's review of the Pixel 6 Pro, he mentioned that the iPhone was more consistent for him. Ironically, there have been several times that I've used the iPhone camera, and there's been inconsistency, where unfortunately they don't get the warmth of a nice restaurant, or they don't get the coolness of a cold day. More times than not, the iPhone seems to kind of standardize the white balance in a photo to the point where I don't get the same emotion out of a photo as I would on the Pixel or even a Samsung phone. That's not to say that iPhone isn't a technically very impressive shooter, it's just frankly I'm not a technical camera guy. Instead, I care more about how good the photos look right out of the camera without any sort of edits. And more consistently, I prefer the Pixel image over the iPhone's image. Now the third camera, the telephoto camera, is where this differs. The telephoto lens on the 13 Pro is a 3x zoom versus the Pixel's 4x zoom, and while that doesn't seem like a big difference, more often than not, I found with the iPhone, I don't really try and get those zoom shots. When I'm too far away from an object, I just give up on the idea of taking a picture of that object. Whereas with the Pixel 6 Pro, I have a little bit more confidence in getting the shot, similar to what my experience with the S21 Ultra earlier this year. Now admittedly, I haven't completely tested video on the Pixel 6 Pro yet as well. While I've taken a couple of videos that have turned out well, frankly, I don't, again, have the confidence that I would have with the iPhone. This has an incredible video camera that is better than just about any other phone that I've ever used, to the point where I've shot many B-roll shots just using this rather than a more traditional point-and-shoot camera. If you are a camera nerd, then technically the iPhone 13 Pro is going to be the better phone, based off of MKBHD's review and others. But if you are more like me, who just wants to take a punchy, interesting photo, for me, the Pixel 6 Pro is the better performer. Finally, let's talk about the price. Technically, the Pixel 6 Pro is $100 cheaper at MSRP, but generally you should try and find promotions to make it even cheaper. The iPhone doesn't always go on promotions unless you're getting it through a carrier, and so $1,000 is generally what you're going to pay for it. In comparison, these prices aren't too far apart, but I will say that if you only plan on keeping your phone for a year or two, the iPhone will depreciate significantly less than the Pixel, and so effectively the actual price that you lose will be less for the iPhone than the Pixel, just based off of historical performance. Now let's say that you decided to make the switch. First, make sure to buy it from a place where there's at least a 14-day return policy with no restocking fee, so you can try out the phone and see if you like it, and then return it if you don't. If you're making the switch from the iPhone to the Pixel, make sure to turn off iMessage because it's going to be a tough process, especially if you rely on iMessage for a lot of things. On the other hand, if you're making the switch between the Pixel and the iPhone, I would say be sure to turn off iMessage when you first get over, unless you want to be locked in for a long period of time. In addition, when you're switching to the iPhone, see if you can get your hands on an Apple Watch Series 4 or newer, because that will make your experience significantly better, as well as a pair of AirPods Pro. Now, obviously that's going to drive up the price, but the ecosystem really is a draw with the iPhone. Now, before I declare a winner, I will say that I am an Android fan, and I worked at Google for some time, and so I have a preference for Pixel devices. But all in all, I would say that out of these two phones, the iPhone feels like the more premium, consistent, cohesive device, and the Pixel 6 Pro still feels like a little bit of an experiment. You are taking a little bit of a risk on Tensor and on Android in choosing the Pixel 6 Pro. Whereas the iPhone 13 Pro is a very known quantity and a very good one at that. Now, if I had my choice, I would obviously go for the Pixel 6 Pro if I could only choose one phone. But I will say that now that I have two phones, it's really easy to keep the 13 Pro in one pocket because it is absolutely the best iPhone ever made. And with that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you for watching this comparison of two of the very best phones on the market. If you like this video, be sure to like and get subscribed. Let me know down in the comments which of these two phones you like better, and I'll catch you in the next one.